Private Detective Federico Esteban Cacipe Gonzaga, also known as Fred, is out to find the family of star quarterback Quentin Barnes. When Quentin was a tall, skinny orphan boy on his homeworld without a penny to his name, he was taken in by a restaurant owner named Mr. Sam. Sam's knowledge will put Fred on the path to discovery and to danger. Welcome to the serialized audiobook, The Detective. Written by Scott Sigler and Matt Wallace. Narrated by Scott Sigler. Hello, junkies. Important note, if you listen to the novella The Reef, it takes place after The Detective. After the episode, I will tell you about my nephew, who is currently on the roster of the Arizona Cardinals. You know, in the NFL. That's right, a Sigler in the NFL. What? Tune in after the episode to learn more. For now, let's rock and roll with The Detective episode number 2. Chapter 5. Mr. Sam. The barbecue brisket tasted better than anything Fred had eaten in the past month. He knew 2 things as soon as he took his first bite. The first was that he was coming back to this dive in Micovi to eat again, and the second was that he would never ask where the meat came from. Fred had seen the local wildlife, and it wasn't anything he'd choose to hunt, kill, and cook if he wasn't starving to death. There were cows on Micovi, but a recent bug had killed off about 80% of them. Until the local herders figured out how to stop the infection, beef was only for church elders and the super rich. Fred was just finishing when an older man with a bulging chin and a filthy apron came by his table. The man pointed to Fred's empty plate. Even most of the sauce was gone, swept up with a kind of cornbread until only abstract orange brushstrokes remained on a field of porcelain white. "Looks like you hated my cooking," the man said. "Worst sauce I ever had. You the chef?" "And the owner. Call me Mr. Sam." "Fred." They shook hands. Fred's curiosity got the better of him. "Sam, I have to ask, do I want to know what that meat was?" Sam smiled. "You got the accent down cold, but you're clearly not from here. Every local knows the taste of round bug." Fred stared. "You're telling me I just ate round bug?" "Delicious, nutritious round bug." "Aren't they poisonous?" "Delicious, nutritious, poisonous if you don't know how to prep them, round bug." Fred nodded. "I see. Well, if I die, I can promise you I won't recommend this place to my friends." The dingy restaurant was almost empty. There were only 2 other patrons, both of whom were busy stuffing their sauce-smeared faces and dropping bits of meat onto tan tablecloths made of coarse paper. "I didn't come for the food, truth be told," Fred said. "I heard that Quentin Barnes grew up here." Mr. Sam smiled. "Football fan?" "In a manner of speaking." "A lot of people come to my place because of Barnes," Sam said. "But he didn't grow up here. I met him when he was 11. He lived here on and off until he was 15 and signed with the Raiders. He's a great kid, I'll tell you that." Another 2 patrons entered. Sam started toward them, but Fred gently held his arm. "Mr. Sam, I'm working for Quentin. Could I have just a moment of your time?" Sam paused, his expression hopeful and also doubtful. "He send you to talk to me?" Easy to read the meaning of those words. Sam missed Quentin. "Afraid not," Sam said. "I'm here to see if I can find his family." Sam glanced at the new customers who had seated themselves. "I guess he's forgotten all about me. I mean, I only took him in and kept him alive. You'd think that'd be worth a call now and then." He's extremely busy," Fred said, the words coming out before he realized how lame they sounded. Sam sighed, then sat. "I only have a minute, but I'm happy to help. You're the second person in here today asking about his family." "Someone else came to talk to you?" Mr. Sam nodded. "Yep. You ever heard of Yolanda Davenport?" Fred leaned back. Yolanda Davenport, reporter for Galaxy Sports magazine. "I have. I've seen her holocaust." Mr. Sam smiled. "She's even better looking in person. I could stand a roll in the hay with that one, you know? Fred smiled and nodded, an automatic, practiced reaction when another human man made a comment about a woman's looks. It was just easier to play along than to explain that Fred didn't want to roll in the hay with any woman. And in the Purist Nation, it was not only easier, it was also safer. Telling the truth. Here, they burned men at the stake for that. "Tell me about it," Fred said. "Quite a body on that girl. What did she want to know?" Mr. Sam shrugged. "Asked a lot of questions like, did Quentin ever bet on games? What was his relationship like with his coach, with Greedock? That kind of thing." "Nothing about his family?" "No, nothing," Mr. Sam said. "She had a different agenda. Besides, I don't know much about his family. When Quentin was little, I tried to find out about his family for him. I mean, when he was young, that boy probably came out of the womb at 100 pounds. He's never been what anyone would call little. Anyway, I'm not a professional, but I couldn't find anything." "Neither could I," Fred said. "I was going to try the Central Records database next." Mr. Sam shook his head. "Already tried that, I'm afraid. My friend Maxwell worked there. We searched for Quentin's name and found nothing." "What about his brother, Quincy Barnes?" "Yep," Mr. Sam said. "We looked, found nothing. That's not surprising, though. For the poor, non-church families in this place, most times there are no records at all." That was bad news. But if Mr. Sam had a contact at Central Records, that could speed things up if Fred turned up any other clues. "You still in touch with Maxwell?" "Afraid not," Mr. Sam said. "Purity investigation. He vanished about 5 years ago. Never found out what happened to him. I did what I could for the boy, but I have a business to run. Did you try the mines where he worked?" "That's where I've been for the last couple of weeks," Fred said. "Enough people remember him, but mostly only as a football standout. He had a reputation as a brawler in the mines, though. Got into a lot of fights." Mr. Sam smiled. "Oh, that. Everyone wanted a piece of the boy because he was so big. He only fought to protect himself. Used to put on a mean face at the mines, but he'd come here after. When no one was looking, he'd cry. He was only 12, 13, and grown men wanted to fight him. He did okay for himself, but he hated it and was always afraid of what might happen." "Can you think of anyone else who knew him as a little kid? Maybe someone who knew his brother? Any of his family?" "Turnover is high in Micovi, my friend," Sam said. "And I'm not talking about losing employees. I'm talking about lifespans. Being close to the wrong person can get you killed if that person gets in trouble. Pay too much attention to someone else's business, that can also get you killed. Most people find it best to stay unattached when it comes to anything outside their doors." Fred nodded. He understood. It was a little different on any Purist Nation planet, but Micovi didn't even qualify as a planet. It was just a colony. As long as the mines and the cornfields kept producing, the rest of the nation could give a crap what went down here. "Well, who should I talk to then? It's important, and I'm running out of time on this rock." Sam's right hand cupped his face. He pulled at his cheeks as he stared off, thinking. "I can't think of one place that might have detailed records on Quentin," he said. "What place would that be?" Mr. Sam jerked his bulbous chin toward the window. Fred looked outside. One structure dominated the view. It was the stadium, the home of the Micovi Raiders, where Quentin Barnes began his professional football career. "Raiderville," Sam said, using the local nickname for the place. "That's the biggest business going here. Bigger than the mines even. Biggest legal business, that is. Now, it ain't Tier 1, mind you, but there's still a lot of money tied up in the PNFL. Stedmar Osborne owns the team. You heard of him?" Fred nodded. "Sure. He runs the rackets here on Micovi, right?" "That and more. He's a rich, powerful man, but he ain't so rich he can afford to pay someone millions and not know what he's getting for that money, so the team keeps the best records it can on prospects and active players. You can sign a kid who's a great talent, pay him in advance, but if he's related to a man who becomes an enemy of the church, that kid can just disappear. The Raiders organization probably learns everything they can about their players. Considering Quentin was the greatest quarterback that place has ever seen, if there are details on his past, that's where they'll be." "Then that's where I'll go." Mr. Sam held up a finger. If you're going to get mixed up in Stedmar's business, you need to watch out for his three goons. Frankie, Sammy, and Dean are mean as a cornered stone cat. They will hurt you. They will hurt you. Not said as hyperbole or as a warning, but as a straight-up fact. What do they look like? They always wear suits. They're big as bulldozers, all three of them. Frankie, they also call him No-Neck. He and Dean are white. Tower white? No, the pinkish kind, like from Earthstock. And Sammy, he's as black gets. His right eye is steel. Hard to miss. You see those three, just get the hell away. You hear me? Fred nodded. That kind of information was not to be taken lightly. Sam tapped a finger on the table. Flattery ain't getting you out of the check, son. And next time you see Quentin, can you tell him I'd love to hear from him? Fred nodded. Of course I will. An easy lie. He wasn't here to help Quentin manage his personal life. Fred paid his bill, leaving a large tip. Chapter 6. Ghoulie. It was more than just a football stadium. Next to the church, Raiderville was the center of Micovi's community. Sometimes those two things combined, usually for major holiday ceremonies, when the local mullah would perform a sermon and the stadium would fill with those who either believed or just wanted to be seen believing. The stadium also supported concerts, religious theater, even community gatherings, when stalls and tents were erected right on the field proper. The stadium also served as the center of public executions. They had burn pits behind either end zone, because who would want to clean the ash off the 50-yard line? The pits were usually covered with a metal disc, painted in whatever bright logo the current advertiser wanted. Yes, from work to play to worship, the stadium reflected the community it served. It did all these things, sure, but on most off-season days, the place was empty. Federico timed his visit for a day of high worship, when the believers packed into Micovi's countless churches. That not only ensured the stadium would be closed, but also that most of the staff would be attending services. That left only a skeleton crew manning the floors to which he needed access. He didn't anticipate much trouble. It wasn't much of a disguise, but he didn't need much. He came ready to hack the service entrance lock, only to find it was broken and only looked locked. Come the preseason for Tier 3, someone would discover that and fix it. For now, it seemed, it made it easier for the service staff to enter, and they hadn't bothered to tell anyone. Fred had slipped in and found the janitor's office. Some gray coveralls, a black staff hat, and a mop and bucket later, he was almost ready to go. He adopted a slouched posture, convinced himself to walk with a slight limp in the right leg, and added a scraggly beard from the kit he carried with him everywhere. 5 minutes after entering the stadium, Federico looked like a different man. A different, shorter, defeated by life man. Raiderville was small as far as stadiums went. It seated 14,250 officially, although when Quentin had been quarterback, they found ways to squeeze in almost 1,000 people more. Everyone in a sold-out Raiderville crowd would barely fill up a single end zone of Ionath Stadium. So it was easy to think of the place as small, but with no one there, the seemingly endless walkways and tunnels made it feel a bit cavernous. Fred made his way toward the stairs that led to the lower levels. Just before he turned a corner, he heard a familiar voice. A voice he had never heard in person, but had heard on dozens of sports broadcasts. He turned that corner. Yolanda Davenport, walking side by side with Ezekiel Graber, head coach of the Micovi Raiders. Her white hair blazed in the hallway's fluorescent lights. She had that solemn, "you can talk to me" look on her face. "I've heard Barnes was a big Krakens fan," she said. "Is that true?" "Oh, no, he wasn't," Graber said. "The Krakens? Barnes loved the Pirates. It's all he ever talked about." "The Toe Pirates?" Yolanda said, as if it was the first time she had ever said those words. "Would he have wanted to be part of that organization?" Graber laughed. Yeah, no question. If he had a chance to play for them, he would take it. They passed by Fred, still talking about Barnes. Fred found his stairwell and headed down. Yolanda Davenport wasn't his business. He was here to find out about Quentin's family, and as long as she wasn't asking about that, he didn't care what she wanted. He reached the bottom floor. In a dry place like Micovi, the local backups would be kept in some basement room. Sure, the stadium was mostly empty, but if he could avoid the personnel offices, which would have more cameras and more guards, all the better. It was laughably easy to find the backups room. There was actually a working lock, but the highest tech on Micovi was at least 20 years out of date in the Quith Concordia, where Fred did most of his business. Still, he timed himself. 33 seconds to get past the lock. Not his best time. Maybe he was getting older and slower. He slid inside and shut the door behind him. Like any Purist Nation business, they kept a local backups area in addition to off-site storage. He smiled when he saw the storage devices. In Ionath City, they would have been the cheapest thing available. 30 years ago, that was. Now, even the cheapest resale shops in Ionath City wouldn't have devices like this. Sometimes, Fred forgot just how backward the Purist Nation was. He lifted his left pants leg. He'd wrapped a sniffer routine hardware sleeve around his calf. He removed it and started connecting it to the interface. The program would route through the Raider's system, collecting any and all references to one Quentin Barnes. Judging by the archaic computer system, it wouldn't take long. He'd just started the automated program when he heard something he knew he should not be hearing. A flopping, coming from inside the walls. No, from the ceiling. A light, irregular thumping. Something was moving in the air vents. Fred might have written it off as a rat, even a round bug, but he actually recognized the staccato beating sound. Ghoulie, what are you doing on Micovi? That sound. It was coming closer. It was coming from the air vent up near the ceiling. Fred looked around the room. He found a chair. He lifted it, then set it ever so quietly on the floor below the vent. 1 foot at a time, he stepped onto the chair, put his hands up below the vent, and waited. Moments later, the fluttering came closer, then stopped. Still, Fred waited, hands raised above him like a spider waiting for the right moment to pounce. He heard the sound of a power screwdriver. The vent grate came away from the wall, then slid inside without a sound. Right about now. Fred timed it perfectly, grabbing hard as soon as he saw motion above him. His hands locked onto the firm body of a small hurrah. The alien immediately tried to fight, but Fred quickly adjusted his grip so that his fingertips pressed into the soft spot on its left flank, behind which lay the creature's stomach. As a kid in school, they had taught Fred how to kill every species in the galaxy. They'd also taught him how to torture them. Puncture the stomach of a hurrah, for which a straight finger punched in hard would do just fine, and the amount of pain would leave the hurrah screaming, ready to answer any question you might have. As soon as Fred's finger pressed down on that spot, the hurrah struggles instantly ceased.
"Rico, you won it,"
said Ghoulie, the backpack strapped to his top emitting the words.
"You're not a killer."
"You're right," Fred said. "Good thing for me, puncturing your stomach will only put you in the hospital for a couple of weeks." Ghoulie said words that came not from his backpack, but from his wide mouth. These words were more of a hiss than a tone. Fred didn't have to speak hurrah to recognize cursing. "Knock it off, Ghoulie. What are you doing batting your way through ducks in a football stadium on this backwater rock?" Fred kept his grip tight. Ghoulie might be small, but he was no defenseless creature. The hurrah was a well-known greaseman who worked the Concordia, the Planetary Union, and now, apparently, the Purist Nation. Ghoulie was a greaseman most of the time. Occasionally, though, he would take the big money and perform a hit. Fred held a tiny killer, and he knew better than to give the winged creature so much as an inch of wiggle room. "Well, answer me, Ghoulie."
"Just seeing the sights,"
Ghoulie said.
"What's it to you?"
Fred pressed the tip of his finger in a little deeper.
I'm on a job. Same as you, that's all.
Same as me? Same trade or same job?
How do I know? You know how it is, Rico. I just find pieces for whoever has a scratch. I don't put puzzles together. That's you.
Don't call me Rico, Fred said.
But that's what people call you. When they want a real hitter, they call for Rico, right?
I don't do that work anymore, Fred said. So call me Rico one more time, and you'll have a brand new hole in your body. You got it?
Yeah, I understand.
So last time I ask, what are you doing here? Ghoulie didn't answer. Instead, he tried to wriggle away again. Fred tightened his grip and began patting him down, feeling Ghoulie's custom bodysuit, looking for anything that might reveal the hurrah's goal. But then again, did Fred really need to find anything? Fred was here looking for information on a certain quarterback. What were the odds that a hurrah grease man was here looking for anything but information on that same quarterback? Barnes, Fred said. You're here for info on Barnes, aren't you? Ghoulie struggled more fiercely than before, and that was all the answer Fred needed. Who sent you, Ghoulie? Anna Villani? Gloria Ogawa? Greedock the Splithead? Fred heard steps outside the door. Heavy steps. It sounded like giants stomping through a playpen. Ghoulie had help. He'd triggered some kind of a call, probably embedded in his suit. That was why he'd struggled so much, even though he clearly couldn't get away. Fred yanked his wings hard enough to separate tendons. How many, Ghoulie? And who are they? Even though the hurrah was clearly in pain, the voice from his backpack sounded cool and clear.
Answer to both questions is the same,
he said.
More than you can handle.
Fred quickly looked around. He opened a desk drawer, stuffed Ghoulie inside, slammed it shut, then pinned a chair against it. There was a muffled shriek from inside and a furious flutter of wings beating against metal, but Ghoulie was trapped. Ghoulie wasn't the only one who didn't have a way out. There was only one door to the room. Fred searched, wondering if he could take the first thug through that door. If there were only two, that might even the odds. But he had no idea who was coming. They could be good church boys, or they could be human hitters from off-system. Then Fred saw his only way out. First, he reached into a pocket for a minicam and set it on the desk. That would record the men who came through the door, sending the signal to the storage cube he had in his pocket. If he got out of this in one piece, he'd have a good look at the men who were working with Ghoulie. Then he detached the sniffer device. Hopefully, it had found some information. That done, Fred ran at the chair he'd set against the wall, jumped, put a foot on the seat, and launched himself up. He slid his arms into the air vent, then his head, worming his body into the too tight space. Behind him, he heard the door rattling as someone tried to get in. Fred's shoes kicked at the wall, trying to push himself deeper into the vent. He couldn't make it far, but that didn't matter. What mattered was not being in that room when the goons came in. The door rattled harder. Then came that pause he knew all too well. Someone big rearing back a meaty shoulder. Fred pushed himself all the way in. He could barely move. It was like a coffin. He moved forward a few feet, then pressed his back against the top of the vent and pushed down as hard as he could. The metal gave way almost immediately. He dropped through and landed hard on a desk. He was in another office, also vacant. Fighting back a groan, Fred rolled to his feet and limped to the door. From the other room, he heard the shuddering crack of a door giving way, and then he heard two voices. Two deep voices. No, that couldn't be. Not on Micovi. He didn't have time to stick around and find out. He quietly slipped out the door into the hall and moved quickly back toward the service entrance. In seconds, he turned the first corner and was gone long before the men rescued Ghoulie and came to look for him. Coveralls gone, Fred walked down the street as a man of the cloth. Blue cloth, the mark of the purest church, his robes covering him from neck to feet. He even had an infinity tattoo on his head. This time, he'd gone for blonde hair. He looked good as a blonde. As he walked, he looked at a few seconds of footage his remote camera had recorded before it was destroyed. He watched the footage and puzzled over the implications. The men who had broken into the room, they weren't men at all, at least not human men. They wore envirosuits, complete with ventilation masks, like the industrial cleaning men who decontaminated the stadium facilities on a regular basis. The suits, however, were huge and bulging in a way that no human would require. And if that wasn't enough of a tip-off, holes had been cut in the masks to allow muscled pedipalps to protrude through. They were Quyth warriors. Fred had seen bigger, but not by much. This was heavy. Alien species weren't allowed to set foot on Purist Nation soil. It happened, of course, especially in the fringes of PN space, but it took a lot of juice to grease the wheels. Ghoulie could get in and work because 99% of the time, no one even saw that Ghoulie was there. That was why he was such a good grease man. But two bruising Quyth warriors? They couldn't exactly hide in the ventilation shafts. Sending Ghoulie here was a risk all by itself. Adding in two Quyth warriors? That meant bribes. That meant getting at least a few people to look the other way. Someone else wanted info on Quentin Barnes, someone with a lot of money, a lot of power. And by now, those warriors had reported back to their Shamakath. Which meant, of course, that now Ghoulie and the warriors would not only be looking for info on Barnes, they would be looking for Fred. Fred had to stay on the job. That's what Quentin paid him for, but Fred knew that a dead man can't find a damn thing. He had to lie low. He couldn't afford to disappear, not with a job still to do, but there were other ways to stay out of sight. Federico Esteban Giuseppe Gonzaga had to become invisible. That is it for the detective episode number 2. Fred now knows that he's not alone in his search for info about Quentin's past. And hey, it's Ghoulie! You may know him from the novella The Reef. Fred now has to become invisible, whatever that means. How is he going to do that? We will find out next week in episode number 3. And hey, I told you before the episode that after the episode, I would tell you about my nephew playing in the NFL, the National Football League. The young man's name is Tyler Sigler IV. If you follow me on Instagram, where I am at Scott Sigler, one word, you've seen me posting pictures with Cardinals gear. He is the reason why. I actually had to record this episode early because I had a 2-week stint away from home, away from San Diego. First, I was at the Mendocino Coast Writers Conference, then dropped back down to L.A. to prep for a pitch for a nocturnal TV series. Then from L.A., went to Phoenix to watch Tyler Sigler IV play football. By the time this episode drops, I will have already watched Tyler's first NFL game, a preseason contest against the Los Angeles Chargers. I hope Tyler does well, or did well, or well, whatever the hell it is. He is a rookie. He's an undrafted free agent. They brought him in for a mini camp, which is preseason, and decided to keep him on the roster. But this does not necessarily mean he will make the final regular season squad. The final roster is on an NFL team is 54 people plus an additional 7 on the practice squad. Those are people who do not dress for games. The Cardinals currently have 88 players on their roster, which means 34 guys have to be cut before the opening game of the regular season. Will Tyler be one of them? Will he make the final squad? We won't know until August 31st, 2019, when NFL teams are required to submit their regular season roster. So keep your fingers crossed for my nephew. He's a super, super cool kid. Even if he doesn't make the final squad, it's been a thrill to follow his endeavors. It's been a great experience for him. And that is it for this week. We will be back next week with the detective episode number 3. And until then, we will talk to you all real soon. You have been listening to The Detective, a Galactic Football League novella. The Detective is also available as an ebook and as a full-length audiobook. If you want the whole story with no waiting, visit scottsigler.com/The Detective for links to Amazon, Audible, and more. Follow Scott on Instagram and Twitter, where he is at Scott Sigler, one word, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Scott Sigler. The Detective audiobook was directed by AB Kovacs and engineered by Steve Riekeberg. Copyright 2019, Empty Set Entertainment, all rights reserved. Theme music is from the band Amps and Volts.